Welcome back to Carneades.org. Today we're going to be continuing with 7 ontological arguments for the existence of God. We have finally reached argument number 7. This is going to be the higher order ontological argument for the existence of God. In this video, I'm going to run through the premises, give you a little bit of a defense or explanation of why you might believe these premises, and then in the next video, I will offer some objections to this argument. And after that, I will do kind of a final summarizing video on all of the ontological arguments we've looked at and kind of some of the inherent problems that exist a little bit through all of them. But that aside, let's take a look at the higher order argument right now. So, the higher order argument, as I offer it, goes as follows. God properties are all properties that God possesses. Any property entailed by other God properties is a God property. Necessary existence, necessary omnipotence, necessary omniscience, and necessary perfect goodness are all God properties. Therefore, God necessarily exists. The first premise, God properties are all properties that God possesses, is just basically a definition. This is a definition of what we're going to mean by God properties. Whenever we say God properties, you could just replace that with properties that God possesses, and you'd be fine. It's a definition, so it's not going to be too controversial. Hopefully. We'll see. Any property entailed by other God properties is a God property. Basically, this means that God properties are something called closed under entailment. If P is a God property and P implies Q, then Q is going to be a God property as well. This seems to make sense. If something has the property of being a square, and the property of being a square entails the property of having 4 sides, then that thing also seems to have the property of having 4 sides. Or so it would seem. And finally, necessary existence, necessary omnipotence, necessary omniscience, and necessary perfect goodness are all God properties. So they're going to go ahead and imply each other or entail each other. If God were to exist in some possible world, he would have these properties. These would be his properties. This is just what we mean by God. God is something that has these properties. Therefore, God exists. One of his properties that was implied by his other properties was necessary existence. So, God exists necessarily, and if God exists necessarily, that means he exists in all possible worlds, including the actual world. Basically, it's kind of a step beyond the modal ontological argument. It takes the idea that God has these properties. Well, if God has one or a couple of these properties, he's going to have the others of these properties. If he has the others of these properties, one of those is necessary existence, and then modal ontological argument. Basically, we have 3 possible worlds in the actual world. God exists in some possible world. He has necessary goodness, because that's a property of God. But necessary goodness entails other God properties, like necessary existence. Wait, if God has necessary existence, that means he exists in all possible worlds. If he exists in all possible worlds, he exists in the actual world, and he is good and has all those properties that he had in possible world A. That's basically how the argument runs. That was the higher order ontological argument for the existence of God. Stay tuned for objections to that argument and some final thoughts on the ontological argument coming up next. Watch this video and more at Carneades.org and stay skeptical, everybody.